Could it be that the bakery is actually a big deal?
Seems like it.
Well, that could mean some money.
My mother-in-law, Jessica, grinned. My husband, Mike, responded with a smile.
I've already got Dad's will, so we can start living the high life now.
But doesn't Emily receive his wool too?
You mean the one where he leaves this bakery to her? All I have to do is take it out of the envelope.
Mike tore up the white envelope he was holding. At that moment, something snapped inside me. I wasn't adopted by my father-in-law, Richard. So, I had no right to inherit his estate. If Jessica and Mike took everything Richard left behind, I would have accepted it without question. But I can't forgive them for going against Richard's wishes. And all they care about is money. If they love money so much, they can cling to it until the very end. And when that money is gone, they'll finally realize what they've really lost. I quietly turned my back on them in the living room. My name is Emily Summers. This year, I turned 40, a milestone year. And in my personal life, I'm standing at a major crossroads. The truth is, I'm contemplating whether to get a divorce. I married Mike more than 10 years ago. We don't have kids, but I wouldn't say we're unhappy. That said, if you ask me if I love Mike, honestly, I'd struggle to answer. Mike doesn't cheat, and he's responsible at work. But he's hopelessly irresponsible with money. And when he's in trouble, he always relies on his father, Richard. A grown man shouldn't be leaning on his parents. Whenever I point this out to Mike, his mother, Jessica, steps in to defend him.
A wife shouldn't be so bossy.
What will Mike do when Richard is gone? As I watched over Richard in the hospital, I quietly sighed. But arguing with Mike about money is nothing new. In fact, I've been noticing our different attitudes toward money for quite some time. Ever since we first met, I've had doubts about how Mike spends his money. For instance, before we got married, we once went to a shopping mall together. At one point, Mike suddenly stopped in front of a high-end store.
What's up?
Oh, there's a watch I've wanted for a while.
Mike pointed to the glass display case. There, a luxury watch was on display.
$4,000? Isn't that a bit much?
What are you talking about? It's a bargain.
Sure, some high-end watches cost over $10,000. But we were in our mid-20s then, saving up for our wedding.
We'll both be working after we get married, right? Once we're living together, we'll be able to save easily.
We'd be able to save more than when we lived alone. We can buy it once we've saved up. I tried to persuade him, but Mike just frowned.
If I don't buy it now,
It's just a little patience, right?
We talked outside the store for about 30 minutes. Finally, Mike gave up. I was relieved, to say the least. Even after getting married, I planned to keep working. So I wasn't worried about us running out of money. But still, it's better not to waste money. Mike accepted my way of thinking. This would work out after we got married. Or so I believed. But on the day before our wedding, while unpacking boxes in our new home, something unexpected happened. I opened a box and found a paper bag I didn't recognize.
This is Mike's?
Yeah, that's right. Just take it to my office. I'll set up the fridge.
Got it.
With that, I carried the package to Mike's office. But something didn't feel right.
Wait, was that a designer brand?
The image flashed through my mind. The bag had a logo from a famous international brand. Of course, I wouldn't be upset if Mike owned something like that. Actually, since Mike works as a sales rep for an international company, I'd expect him to look sharp. But for some reason, this time, it bothered me. So, despite feeling guilty, I decided to check the package.
What? This is.
Inside the bag was a luxury watch. It was the one we had seen at the shopping mall. I immediately confronted Mike. He stammered as he tried to explain.
My boss told me I needed a good watch, so I had no choice but to buy it.
Then why didn't you talk to me about it?
Well, it's a work thing.
He didn't think it was something to discuss. He admitted he was wrong to buy it without telling me. Mike gave such feeble excuses. Naturally, I was upset. But there was no point in arguing about it now.
Just consult with me next time.
In the end, that was all I said. But after that, Mike continued to make big purchases without asking me. It was bound to catch up to me at some point. Yet, I didn't notice, because Mike was clever about it. What shocked me most was that Mike had been getting money from Richard. When he ran out of cash, he would ask Richard for help. It goes without saying that a grown man shouldn't be doing that. Had I known, I would have put a stop to it. But I didn't find out until much later. It was about a year ago when Richard fell ill and was hospitalized. As I was talking to him in his hospital bed, I found out. Now that I think about it, Mike was pretty shaken up when he heard Richard was hospitalized.
What? Dad's in the hospital?
Mike raised his voice suddenly while talking to Jessica on the phone. Richard's in the hospital? I asked Mike, who nodded at me while still on the phone with Jessica.
And? How's he doing?
I couldn't hear the conversation, but it sounded serious. When Mike finally hung up, he turned to me. Then, hesitantly, he said,
I'm thinking of going back home for a while.
"That sounds like a good idea."
No, I mean, I want to move back and live with Mom.
Mike's sudden words startled me. Sure, with Richard gone, I was worried about Jessica. But moving back to live with them seemed a bit too drastic. As I silently wondered what to do, Mike started explaining his reasons. Mike was Richard and Jessica's only child, so without him, Jessica would be all alone. Also, Richard ran a bakery, and even while hospitalized, someone needed to manage the shop. But Jessica had little work experience and couldn't help much with the business. So, it made sense for either Mike or me to lend a hand. Mike said all of this. But what about work? If we moved in with Mike's parents, we'd both have to quit our jobs. That would defeat the purpose. I was thinking this, but Mike continued with a smile.
Don't worry. I'll request a transfer.
A transfer?
Yeah, our company has a branch near my parents' place.
Mike's company has several branches across the country. One of them happens to be close to his parents' home. If he got transferred there, he wouldn't have to quit his job. That's what Mike was telling me. But I can't do that.
Right, your company.
My company only has one headquarters, where I work now. Mike's parents' home is too far for me to commute from. Still, Richard had been so kind to me from the first time we met. I wanted to repay his kindness before it was too late. After thinking it over, I decided to quit my job. Mike, meanwhile, submitted his transfer request. And eventually, Mike got transferred to the branch near his parents' home. I quit my job and started helping Richard with his work. Then Richard said something surprising.
Emily, would you like to become an employee here?
Huh? Me?
Yeah, I feel bad making you work for free, and I'd like to pay you a salary if you join the team.
It was an offer I couldn't refuse. I immediately accepted. After that, I started working at Richard's Bakery as a mid-career hire. Jessica wasn't thrilled, but she reluctantly agreed when I told her I would be looking after Richard. And so, I began a new chapter at Richard's Bakery. Once I started working there, I realized it was an even better place than I had imagined. There were skilled artisans and many kind people. It's such a great shop. Why didn't you take it over, Mike? I asked Mike this soon after I started working. Normally, Mike would have been the heir. But instead, he joined the corporate world and had no intention of taking over the bakery. We had discussed this before we got married, but once I started working there, it seemed strange to me that he wouldn't take over.
Bakery? That's so old-fashioned. Plus, it doesn't seem to make much money.
Huh? Old-fashioned? Not making money?
Yeah, I've been to the shop a few times, but there were hardly any customers.
After that, I didn't really hear the rest. Basically, he thought it was outdated and unprofitable. I couldn't believe Mike thought of Richard's work that way. My love for Mike started to cool rapidly. All that happened about a year ago. Later, during a conversation with Richard about work, he told me that he had been giving money to Mike. But Richard added that it was a long time ago. When I asked how long ago, Richard just laughed.
It's been years now. I think he just wanted to show off a bit after you two first got married.
Apparently, Mike told Richard he bought those luxury items to impress me. Even though some details didn't quite add up, I didn't say anything to avoid burdening Richard. Not long after, Richard's condition suddenly worsened. It became difficult for him to talk. During that time, Richard asked me for a certain favor.
Would you do this for me?
I don't mind, but are you sure?
Yes. Lately, I've been getting a sense of things, just by the atmosphere.
Richard said this with a cheerful smile. That was the last meaningful conversation I had with Richard. A few days later, he was no longer able to speak. I asked Jessica and Mike to come visit him.
What? Visit? I'm too busy.
I had no idea what she was so busy with. Regardless, Jessica refused to visit Richard. And Mike, too, used work as an excuse not to go. Please don't say that. This might be your last chance.
I get that, but I've got work.
Mike just shrugged it off. I was absolutely furious. At this point, I could understand why Richard had made that request of me. I was completely done with Mike. I needed to seriously consider divorce. I was beginning to think about separating from Mike. Then, right after that, Richard passed away. My mind went blank. There were still so many things I wanted to ask Richard. I couldn't just sit there. I pulled myself together and started preparing for Richard's funeral. From the bakery, Richard's employee, a pastry chef named John, came to help. But for some reason, John and Jessica started arguing.
What? Why does it have to be so flashy?
Well, many people associated with the store will be attending, so.
It doesn't have to be that big. It's not like the shop is paying for the funeral.
It seemed they were arguing over the scale of the funeral. Jessica wanted to keep it modest to save on costs. On the other hand, John argued that considering the number of attendees, it should be larger.
There's also the cost of return gifts. It's a lot of money, you know. Can't you understand that?
We'll handle the return gift by providing some sweets. Leave it to us, the pastry chefs.
What? You'll probably charge us for that too, won't you? We're not made of money.
It was clear they weren't going to agree. I had no choice but to step in. Jessica, I'll take care of the funeral arrangements. Why don't you go rest?
What? Are you trying to get rid of me?
You've been married for a long time. It's normal to feel down. It would be best if she took a break now. I tried to persuade Jessica that way. She clicked her tongue softly and said to me,
Do whatever you want, but I'm not giving you a penny more than what I've prepared.
I'll cover any shortfall. I said that politely, and Jessica snorted. Mike, who was next to her, tried to calm her down and said to me,
Sorry, can you handle it? I'll take care of Mom.
That arrangement worked better for me as well. I entrusted Jessica to Mike. After that, John and I continued preparing for the funeral. Thanks to our efforts, we were able to hold a splendid ceremony. But the size of the funeral ended up backfiring. Many people attended, not just those associated with the bakery. There were also people from local businesses and even state legislators. Jessica and Mike were both stunned by the turnout. As the funeral came to an end, Mike asked me,
Hey, was Dad famous or something?
Richard was well respected by many people, and of course, the bakery is famous too.
I had no idea.
Mike seemed a bit down. Maybe he finally realized how great his father was. If he's feeling this way, maybe we don't have to get divorced after all. I was thinking about that while mourning Richard's passing. The day after the funeral, I went to the bakery to collect Richard's belongings. Back home, Jessica and Mike were busy preparing thank you notes for the funeral. I needed to help when I got back. With that in mind, I hurried home. I'm back. I called out as I entered the house. But there was no response. Wondering what was going on, I headed to the living room. That's when I overheard Jessica and Mike talking.
Did you see who attended the funeral? There were even some big names.
Yeah, I was shocked when a department head from one of our corporate clients showed up.
Mike sighed. Jessica frowned as she continued.
Could it be that the bakery is actually a big deal?
Seems like it.
Well, that could mean some money.
Jessica grinned. Mike responded with a smile.
I've got Dad's will, so we can start living it up now.
But doesn't Emily have a will too?
You mean the one where he leaves the bakery to her? All I have to do is take it out of the envelope.
Mike tore up the white envelope he was holding. At that moment, something snapped inside me. I wasn't adopted by Richard, so I had no right to inherit his estate. If Jessica and Mike took everything Richard left behind, I would have accepted it without question. But I can't forgive them for going against Richard's wishes. And all they care about is money. If they love money so much, they can cling to it until the very end. And when that money is gone, they'll finally realize what they've really lost. I quietly turned my back on them in the living room. Then I headed to my room. Without Jessica and Mike noticing, I quietly packed my things. Not much, just a few days' worth of clothes stuffed into a bag. I left the signed divorce papers and a note on the table. This is goodbye. I whispered to myself and quietly left the house. I headed straight to an internet cafe near the station to search for a nearby extended stay hotel. Luckily, I found a vacant one about 10 minutes away by car. Considering what Jessica and Mike had been talking about, I might have to quit the bakery. But thanks to Richard, I had enough money to get by for now. The room I found was available for immediate move-in, so I signed the lease. The next day, I moved into my new place. First, I needed to get Mike to agree to the divorce. Revenge on both of them would come later. I also had to fulfill Richard's request. Richard, you can count on me. I was just thinking about when to go back for my belongings when I noticed several missed calls on my phone. There were about 30 calls from Jessica and Mike. They'd all come in the past few hours. So they'd finally noticed I was gone. Just as I was thinking that, my phone rang again. Hello.
Finally. Where are you, Emily?
Mike's loud voice made me wince. He quickly followed up.
You didn't come home last night. What are you doing? Where are you?
It doesn't matter where I am, does it? I'm getting a divorce.
What? A divorce?
That's right. Didn't you see the note? I left it on the table with the divorce papers. I heard the sound of Mike rushing around, and then his shocked, high-pitched voice.
What the hell is this?
Exactly what it looks like. I'm done with you only caring about money.
I didn't. That's not.
Mike began making excuses, but his words were mumbled and hard to make out. What? Can't say it clearly because you feel guilty?
No. What about you? Where did you go?
What do you mean? When I asked, Mike continued, sounding a bit flustered.
You say all this, but you've probably run off to some lover, haven't you?
What? What are you talking about?
Come on, who just up and leaves like that? You had to have somewhere to go.
Mike's voice grew louder. I sighed and responded, "Sorry to disappoint, but I'm staying at an extended stay hotel."
I can't believe you. You quit your job when we moved, so you don't have any money.
I was helping out at Richard's bakery. Mike and Jessica both knew I was working at the bakery. Actually, they more or less forced it on me. Plus, Jessica had me take care of Richard as well.
What? Were you getting an allowance from Dad?
That's what you were doing. I almost snapped back. But now wasn't the time for sarcasm. I took a deep breath and continued. I was a paid employee.
What? You're kidding.
No, I'm not. Richard was looking out for me. Richard had said he couldn't bear to be a burden on me after being neglected by his own wife and son. Anyway, Mike should now understand that I had money.
Oh well.
Mike seemed to have lost his ability to argue once he realized I wasn't financially dependent on him. I decided to press the issue. Anyway, I want a divorce, Mike. Are you going to sign the papers or not?
A divorce. I mean, let's not rush into that.
I'm not listening to anything you say unless it's to tell me you're signing those papers, I declared firmly. I then heard a small, frustrated click of Mike's tongue. Finally, Mike, who had been muttering under his breath, suddenly shouted,
Fine. I'll divorce you.
I recorded that just now.
I'll sign the divorce papers, so come back. We can't move forward with the inheritance without you.
Mike finally revealed his true intentions. But there's one thing he didn't realize. He just exposed the fact that there's a will from Richard addressed to me. As I've mentioned, I'm not Richard's biological daughter. So, I'm not an heir to his estate. In other words, there's no need for me to be involved in any inheritance discussions. But if my presence is necessary, it must mean that I'm somehow involved in the inheritance. He's really clueless. I sighed quietly. In any case, I got Mike to agree to the divorce, and he has no idea what's coming his way. He's going to regret those words. I couldn't help but smile. The next day, I went to Mike's parents' house to get the divorce papers. There, I found Jessica, Mike, and an unfamiliar man in a suit. According to Mike, the man was a lawyer. He'd been called to discuss the inheritance.
Since we're talking about the divorce, this is perfect timing.
I was planning to hire a lawyer myself. But this works out even better. In that case, could I ask you to handle my divorce as well?
Certainly.
The lawyer nodded with a smile. And so, the discussion about Richard's inheritance began. Richard's estate included cash, securities, a house, and land. However, it seemed that the only heirs were Jessica and Mike. In that case, there shouldn't be much to discuss. Normally, that would be the end of it, but Jessica and Mike had a will from Richard addressed to me. That's probably why they called the lawyer. Do they really want to ignore the will addressed to me? I was a bit suspicious, but the lawyer continued the conversation without a word.
So, you're holding the wills.
Oh, yes. Here they are.
Mike placed 2 envelopes on the table. One was addressed to Jessica and the other to Mike. The will supposedly addressed to me wasn't there. That's to be expected, but it still frustrated me.
Did you read the contents?
The lawyer asked as he flipped the envelopes over.
Well, the envelopes weren't sealed.
It appears so. Let's take a look.
The lawyer opened the envelope addressed to Jessica first. Inside was a single sheet of paper.
You are to receive the house and land.
The entire will was written in simple, phonetic characters without specifying who you referred to. But it was clearly signed and stamped by Richard. Mike's will was written similarly, stating that he would receive cash and securities, also signed and stamped.
Oh, there's another document here.
The lawyer noticed another sheet of paper. The paper read,
I leave the bakery to you.
Yes, my father ran a bakery.
So the eldest son will take over the shop, along with the securities. That seems appropriate.
The lawyer said this as he made notes. At that moment, Mike gave me a sly grin. Oh, how clueless he is. I overheard their conversation. So I know this will was originally meant for me. But since Mike doesn't know that I heard them, he thinks he's in the clear as long as he keeps quiet. If he tries anything else, it'll only make him suspicious. He can't even hide his satisfaction. I sighed inwardly. For now, I played along as if I knew nothing. In the end, the inheritance was divided according to the will, with Jessica and Mike inheriting everything from Richard. Feeling triumphant over getting what he wanted, Mike easily agreed to the divorce settlement I proposed. He even signed the divorce papers on the spot.
Here, is this good enough for you?
Yes, it is. After the lawyer confirmed everything, I nodded deeply. After the lawyer left, I bid my farewell to Jessica and Mike. Thank you for everything over the years.
Well, we only lived together for about a year, but you were married for a long time, weren't you?
Jessica smirked. She seemed pretty happy to see me go. Yes, it's been over 10 years.
So, what are you going to do now?
I'm going to keep working. I have plenty to do. As soon as I said that, Jessica looked puzzled. But only for a moment before she laughed and said to me,
Huh, were you not listening? The bakery now belongs to Mike.
Yes, that's true.
Yes, that's true. Do you plan to stick around even after the divorce? Isn't that a bit presumptuous?
Jessica snorted. I responded firmly, Don't worry, my workplace isn't the bakery.
Huh? Not the bakery?
Richard also ran a confectionery company. Jessica and Mike's eyes widened in surprise. As it turns out, Richard owned 2 businesses. One was the old bakery they knew about. The other was a confectionery company which operated a factory to produce sweets. This company had a large factory in town and employed quite a few people. In recent years, Richard had focused more on the confectionery company, while John mostly ran the bakery. I was employed by the confectionery company. So, even though the bakery now belonged to Mike, it didn't affect me. When I told them this, Mike's face turned red as he started shouting,
What the hell is that? That business should be mine too.
"Sorry, but it's not.
Why not?
I inherited the confectionery company's shares. This all happened shortly before Richard passed away. He had asked me to do something for him. That was to run the confectionery company. A few years ago, Richard considered automating his traditional bakery. He thought about introducing machinery for part of the production process while keeping the store running as usual. However, if you're only going to partially automate, it's better to develop new products that can be fully machine-produced. With that advice from John, Richard decided to establish a separate confectionery company. He then separated the machine-producible items from those that weren't and started making different products for the confectionery company and the store. This strategy was more successful than anticipated. As a result, the confectionery company quickly grew. Meanwhile, Richard also focused on the traditional bakery by developing collaborative products. Because of that, Richard's company became a major focus in the local community. But neither of you cared. So, Richard decided to pass it on to me.
Why you?
Jessica's face turned bright red as she started to get angry. If you had visited Richard at the hospital, maybe the company would have been passed on to you. I couldn't help but smile as I watched Jessica biting her lip in frustration. Now, I've avenged Richard. As I was thinking that, Mike suddenly came up to me.
Hey, Emily, let's start over.
Huh? Why would I?
Dad worked with the bakery too, right? So let's get back together as a couple.
It'd be better if we worked together as husband and wife. Richard would have wanted that too. Mike kept insisting that's what Richard would have wanted. But it's too late for that now. No way. The divorce is final. There's no going back.
But Dad would have. Oh, that's right. Look at this.
Mike grabbed the will from earlier. He held it out to me and continued.
The part in the will about leaving the bakery, it was actually meant for you.
I never thought Mike would expose himself for forging the will. I was shocked at how pathetic he looked. While I was speechless, Mike added,
See? Isn't this great? Emily, I'll make you an officer. No, the president of the bakery.
"Do you even realize what you're saying? Forging a will is a crime. Is this forgery or alteration of a will? I don't know what crime this falls under, but even just hiding a will is illegal. In any case, what Jessica and Mike did was illegal. Maybe Jessica realized that because she was just pacing around nervously by herself. Meanwhile, Mike didn't seem to care at all. He was desperately trying to defend himself, saying,
I didn't really falsify anything. There's no name on the will.
Then there's no way to know if it was meant for me.
No, this paper was inside an envelope with your name on it, Emily.
I saw Mike tear that envelope to pieces, so I believe what he did amounts to destroying a will. Just for that, Mike could be disqualified from inheriting anything. At least, that's what I think. But even if I told him that, Mike wouldn't understand. So I decided to explain it in a way even he could get. I pulled out a copy of a certain document from my bag, placed it in front of Mike and Jessica, and said, "This is a copy of Richard's real will."
What? The real will?
The truth is, Richard had entrusted me with his will. It's an official document with a date, signature, and seal. And the will I have has a properly addressed name on it. However, as long as there's no contradiction with a newer will, even an earlier one can be recognized. By the way, the only discrepancy between the will I held and the newer one was just one thing: the fate of the bakery. In the will I possess, it was written, "The bakery is to be passed on to John. I'll contact the lawyer about it later."
What? Then why did Dad leave something like this?
Mike clenched the supposed will meant for me in his hands. I sighed and gave him the answer. "That's not about the bakery. It's about our company." In other words, the will Richard handed to them was deliberately written in phonetic characters to cause confusion. If they had visited Richard in the hospital, he would have surely told them the truth. They would have known that Richard owned both the bakery and the confectionery company and was focusing more on the confectionery business. If they had understood that, they could have figured out whether Richard intended to leave the bakery or the company to me, and could have advised him right then and there. But they never visited him, not once. Naturally, Richard gave up on them at some point, and before he passed, he transferred shares of the confectionery company to me as a gift. Paying the taxes is tough, but I'm determined to do it for Richard.
Wait a second. So I'm left with nothing?
Looks like both of you will likely be disqualified from inheriting anything. I smiled. I wouldn't mind that at all. And besides, Richard had outlined what to do if they couldn't inherit in his will.
Wait, does that mean I won't get the house or the land either?
Jessica asked, trembling. I laughed and answered her. That's right. The house, the land, and all the money, they're all to be donated.
No way.
Jessica collapsed in tears on the spot. Mike, on the other hand, was already in shock, barely able to produce a dry laugh. As I watched them out of the corner of my eye, I was on the phone with the lawyer. Later, I informed the lawyer about the other will and how Jessica and Mike had tried to claim the one meant for me as their own. I don't really know what happened after that. I left everything in the lawyer's hands. What I do know is that John inherited the bakery. And according to what I heard from the lawyer, the house, land, and money were all donated. Actually, Mike even told me he couldn't pay alimony because he was broke. So I'm pretty sure that's what happened. In the end, Mike is working a part-time job to pay the alimony. When I asked about his job, he said he quit because he thought he'd be getting the bakery. Honestly, it's just ridiculous. Why did I ever marry someone like him? I really don't know anymore. Anyway, I'm just glad the divorce went through smoothly. Now, Jessica and Mike are both working part-time at a local factory. As for me, I'm busy at the confectionery company. Since it's the company Richard left behind, I can't afford to slack off. I'm working hard every day, but there are still moments of joy in my busy days. Yeah, it turned out great today. I tasted a muffin fresh from the factory. It was a traditional muffin with a gentle sweetness that filled my mouth. Richard, I'll make sure to preserve this flavor. On my next day off, I'll bring this muffin when I visit Richard's grave. As I was thinking that, the muffin wrapper fell from the desk. It felt like a breeze had blown through the closed office.